of the paper. It's determined that Maryhugh will make 1A, along with a piece on interstate construction projects and maybe the dancers and some new report on welfare. It is tentative. The face of it all can change up to late evening, and that's a good thing, because at the very time these folks are determining the news of Minneapolis, there's a little speech about to be made in Toronto that will force them to think it all over again.
I got a top story here.
Let's bring it down to 12.
Well, let's just call it money effects.
We got too many Morrises in the mix.
So I hope that the same kind of atmosphere can be created here.
Sports has just learned that Twins pitcher Jack Morris has signed a deal with the Toronto Blue Jays. The producers will have to make last-minute changes.
With the Jack Morris thing, we're going to have a VO first, that's Morris signs like we have already. Then he's going to go to a VO effects.
Last-minute changes are common, and the producers are skilled surgeons, cutting and pasting stories together as needed. Most are able to juggle several activities at a time.
And he is going to have a VO, right?
Yeah. It'll be the same place. We're going to get a shot.
Our main target will be so-called predatory offenders.
In the newsroom, photographers make last-minute edits while the crew prepares to go on the air.
Chair by Paul's mic, chair by the cue.
Good evening. Pat has a night off.
While violent crime was still the lead at 6, the Jack Morris story could not wait for sports. It would have to play higher in the newscast.
Well, it's kind of hard to believe, isn't it, Paul, Diana? News came from Toronto within the hour.
And so what the viewers saw that night was the combination of hours of careful planning and quick thinking.
It's sort of like a sculpture almost. You sort of mold it as you're going along, and hopefully it looks like a work of art when it's done.
While the early newscasts at KARE-TV are done, the paper is just warming up to what will be one of the big stories of the week.
Obviously, getting a hold of Jack Morris is going to be as difficult as, rewriting the Dead Sea Scrolls, I suppose.
Kelly had a very poetic quote today, which it's kind of hard to believe that Tom Kelly's turning into a poet, but he said, what was it? Baseball is a game in the summer, and it's a business in the winter. So it's pretty good for Tom Kelly.
Two writers will work on what will be one, if not the biggest local story of the day, Jack Morris leaving the Twins. John Rowe will tell the readers what happened.
Have you got a good lead on there yet? You know what you're...
The first sentence so far is the money talked and Jack Morris walked.
Kind of sums it up.
Now, I must emphasize that what I write is not necessarily what appears in the paper.
Pat Royce will tell you what to think about it. At least, he tells you what he thinks.
My theory is anyone who wins a Game 7 in the World Series for your team, you ought to love them for life, because it's not going to happen that often.
Their stories will appear on the sports page, but there's a page 1 story they'll write up as well. Editors map out what page 1 will look like on computer screens. The writers literally fill in the space outlined by the screen, and they push the right buttons to deliver hard copy a few floors away. By midnight, John Rowe's lead sentence was stolen by headline writers, but his story is pretty well intact. Royce's column was laid out as the editors gathered around. Then the myriad of conveyors spread the word of Jack Morris and the Blue Jays, of the boy who killed Dad for Mom, of road improvements, defecting dancers, General Motors, and the nation's economy. It's dropped to trucks and delivered by hand to your home. And by the time you get it, a wider-eyed crew is already working to do it again tomorrow.
Just a reminder, we want to encourage our audience to go ahead and feel like you can get involved in asking questions. There are microphones located around the room, and that's been explained to you, so feel free to do so. But we might begin by asking the panel some questions. In fact, I think we can all agree that the Morris story was a very big story here in the Twin Cities when Jack decided to go up to Toronto. The governor's news conference, on the other hand, we might start with Tim McGuire at the Star Tribune. Tim, the governor wanted me to ask you why your paper didn't necessarily feel his news conference was important.
Well, our lead story that day was the struggling economy and the General Motors layoffs, which obviously is a story that affects all of us because, as the old saying goes, as goes General Motors, so goes our country. The crime story was a political position taken on something that has become of import, but our B section cover, our Metro page, covers that kind of news and focuses for readers on that kind of subject. And what we try to do on page 1 is present what really matters to people, both importance and interest.
Peter Pritchard, let me ask you a question. You're the editor of USA Today. If you'd been editing the Star and Tribune that day, my guess is that the Jack Morris story would have landed on page 1 in a banner in your paper.
Probably, because we are the national sports newspaper, so if I were taking that philosophy to Minneapolis, I think that's right. As it so happens, we brought the GM story to the top of the page the same day because I agree with Tim. I thought that was a huge economic story.
Let me ask you a question about the impact of your paper on news and how it's perceived generally in this country. You've taken a more serious turn in the past couple of years, but there are still complaints from traditionalists that what's happened to journalism in America is that it's all following the lead of USA Today. That it's shorter stories, much more emphasis these days on entertainment than there is on information. Bad charge?
Well, I think that some people have copied us in the wrong way. I think that in emphasizing stories that people are interested in, we may have had some beneficial effect on the media. I think we've also had some beneficial effect in the areas of graphics and color and no jumps other than the section fronts. But it is true that some of our brethren in the business have probably imitated us in the wrong way. I would agree with that.
Pat Miles is out in the audience with us right now. And Pat, you have an audience member with a question.
That's right, Paul. Chris Panos is with us tonight, and I think, if I understood his concerns correctly, he has a problem with the managers who decide each day what content is important. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, I'll explain it in my own words. I don't need a microphone because my voice is as powerful as Mr. Tom Brokaw there. Hold it on the side.
The problem is if you don't use the microphone, it won't be so powerful that it'll carry outside the theater.
For our television audience, Chris.
This thing that you're talking about, how you're collecting all this information, if you put 365 days of these tapes, I can come up with one. Crimes, rapes, and killings, and I don't know what else. I want solutions, not to inform me about the gossip that's going on around here. It's like somebody that's in the circus and is teaching us how they perform behind the stage. So if you understand what I mean, do you know the...
Well, let me ask...
Yeah, I do. Just a minute, I'm not done.
No, I'm...
You're not going to cut me out like somebody else. No. I'm not Gorbachev, you know.
I'm more than happy to take your question, and I think that it's...
I'm just talking. How many minutes do I have? 5 or 2?
No, you asked the question, and I'm now going to respond. Those are the rules.
I have loaded questions. The question is, you lost my... This is the way he interrupts people, Mr. Gorbachev, so he cannot express himself. He went over there to step on a person that contributed so much to the world. He went and stepped on him and he said, I did it. We did it. The Americans did it. No, well, the system failed by itself because it was corrupted. Lenin was good at his time.
I'm going to interrupt right now because we don't have time for speeches tonight, but you did ask a question.
I'm going to ban every one of them.
Let us respond to your question. Please let me finish.
Politics,
take the mic away. Let's cut that mic off. Let's do this.
Well, let me answer the question, because I think that the first half of your question was a fair one, and let me address it. The question is, why isn't there more coverage given to solutions? The fact of the matter is, well, as a matter of fact, you can be our guest. I mean, that's part of the beauty of the it's part of the beauty of the First Amendment. We let everybody talk, and the reason that we're all here tonight is to hear what a wide variety of people have to say. My answer to your question is, if you will stop and listen for just a moment, is that in fact that there is more emphasis these days on solutions. That this country, and this world for that matter, knows that we're in a time of profound change, and people are eager for answers to the questions that trouble them, not just economically but culturally as well. This forum is assembled tonight in an effort to address some of the questions that people raise about the gathering of news and the use of information. The matter of fact, what you saw tonight was just a brief summary of the issues that people were dealing with that day. Part of the coverage of crime, for example, is not just the exploitation of the violence in our society, but it hopes that it will, in fact, help motivate people to deal with it. And what we're doing now on a regular basis on NBC Nightly News is a feature every week called What Works in American Society. We take a long portion of one program and deal with those innovative programs across America in education, in business, in a whole variety of areas, and we try to share that with the American television audience so that they will have a solution. We don't pretend to be perfect. We don't pretend to represent all the philosophies or the hopes of everybody in our audience. But when we deal with a national news audience, we think by and large we do a fairly good job, and we do appreciate your question.
What we will do right now is take a very short break, and we will come right back.
RTV. RTV. Rainbow In-Store TV. Watch it. Watch it. Featuring the Twin Cities' greatest hits, low, low prices, and good stuff. RTV. RTV. Watch and win a trip to the Ice Palace Super Bowl party and your chance to be limoed away to Super Bowl 26. RTV. Rainbow In-Store TV. RTV. Watch it and win.
Chevrolet, home in the heartland. For 1992, Cavalier is our value leader, your savings leader. Just $88.74 after rebates. For 1992, Lumina again wins Family Circle Magazine's Domestic Car of the Year. Our Lumina's loaded, only $14,980.
Driving you home in the heartland. Chevrolet Geo.
See your Heartland Chevrolet Geo dealer this week and save.
What's the best thing about American Family Auto Insurance? Well, why not ask my mom? She's had American Family for over 20 years.
Well, really, you should ask my dad. He's had American Family Auto for over 30 years.
They take care of my family. I like that.
Loyalty, the mark of satisfied customers.
American Family Insurance.
Look in the white or yellow pages for the American Family agent nearest you.
Tonight, the battle has been joined.
From a war in the desert to a miracle on ice, we were shocked
You spoke about acts that you've seen.
and filled with joy. A whole world changed, and the magic came back. While heroes returned, others said goodbye. As this year ends, just remember, if it goes on here, you'll see it here.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we move on to another topic, I feel like we should perhaps bring the topic we were just discussing before we went to the commercial break to a conclusion. And I might address Sharon Sales-Belton. The ward that you represent in the city of Minneapolis has a lot of the problems of the inner city. And we're not in the business of seeking out solutions. Those we just report them. But I want to ask you, when you have residents of your neighborhood who get together to try and reach solutions for problems in the neighborhood, does the media do a good job of addressing those issues?
In some ways, I'd say yes, Paul, but I do want to just mention that I think that it takes some time to get to the good part of what the media might do in portraying the positive side of the community's efforts. And because there has been so much done to show the negative, that they really have to vent their anger and their frustration about the negative story. Because the truth of the matter is that for long periods of time, area residents, put forth effort to try to make change. And the amount of time that they get perhaps in a news segment is so limited, and it is not a reflection of how much effort they really have put forward. And there is a tremendous amount of anger and frustration, not only on the film media, but as well on the print media.
Mindy Kiernan, I'm sure you get the same question that we all do if you're in journalism. Why do you only print the bad news? How do you answer that?
We try not to print only the bad news, but there's a fair amount of bad news going on out there, and we have an obligation to cover a wide variety of news. And I think our entertainment sections, for example, do a good job of covering a different part of people's life, but we have a responsibility to cover a whole range of issues. And crime, unfortunately, is a huge part of this society these days, and we have a moral obligation and a civic obligation to deal with that.
But do you also deal with possible solutions to it?
Absolutely.
Looking at more community groups and how they're organizing and so on?
Absolutely. I mean, we try to run lists of where people can go for additional information. We try to run lists of neighborhood coalitions and where they're meeting. We try to put a spotlight on a program that is helping unwed teenagers get through high school and issues like that. But no doubt about it, I think the crime issue comes up over and over again because it's pervasive everywhere you turn, everywhere you look, and it's more than the solutions.
And is it as the reporter said in the Star Tribune package when he referred to the story, I think it was out of North Dakota, that's a much sexier story? Mother writing the letter, the confession letter?
Again, it's what will matter to people. It's what people will talk about at the water cooler. It's what's important to them. It's something that will touch them.
I think people want balance, and I think that's not what people are getting. And it's one thing to report the news, and I think people want to be aware of what's going on in the community, and so that they can do whatever they need to do to prepare themselves for it. But I think they want balance, and I think citizens are making a tremendous effort to try to address problems and work in cooperation with groups that are doing things, and I don't think they believe that the balance is there.
An extension of what Mindy said, however, is there's more good news than people remember. People tend to focus on the bad news.
I think there's been a wholesale retreat from the inner city and from neighborhood groups and neighborhood news coverage. In the 60s, when the cities were burning, every newspaper, I was with the Pioneer Press at the time, and TV station had beat reporters cover neighborhood meetings, neighborhood groups, the Moore Board, Pilot City, Tactics, neighborhood organizations. As the cities cooled down and people became either resistant to or tired of hearing those voices that describe the decay and the problems and the frustration, I feel our newspapers and TV and radio media abandoned coverage of community organizations, community people who met to solve problems and who did do that, but they've been ignored.
Yes, I would like to say something about, Paul said that we just report the news. We don't necessarily find solutions, and I don't think it's the media's role to find solutions and solve problems, but I do think there's this really rich tradition in journalism of interpretive journalism, of analysis, of explanation, and you need to do that, and in the process of doing that you find solutions. If you just report the news and there's no context, you're not making the connections, people are confused. They see there's a crime, so there's a crime there. What's created then? Let's go find a solution to the crime problem? No, it's fear. I'm afraid in my community because there's another crime occurring. It needs to be put in context. We need to make connections from one news event to the other, I think.
May I ask Janet Mason a question about local news coverage? Because I've been struck about the change between the time when I was working in local news and what goes on now. And I'm not an expert in this. But we used to cover City Hall a lot, for example, when I was in local news. And we covered those community hearings because I was working in local news in the 60s. That doesn't happen anymore in most communities in this country. Local news has a different kind of agenda off which it is operating. Why was there that change?
I think news organizations were trying to respond to issues that were of concern to our viewers, for instance. There was a time when I first came here 13 years ago that all the coverage of the legislature was basically a bunch of lawmakers talking about the issue. And what we've done now is take that issue to the people who are really impacted by that issue. So if it was the legislation that affects farming, instead of having the debate on the floor of the House or of the Senate, we now go to the farmers who are impacted, because those are the real people who feel the negativeness. If it's a poor economy, it's not the lawmakers. So I think that's the change, that we're more responsive to the people that we're serving.
I think this next piece of information that we want to get to segues very well into that, and that deals with cultural diversity within our community, getting to the people. A look at how we in the media portray people of color.
Well, a lot of people say that we only cover the murders, of course, and their folk festivals, and reporters wonder if we should ask the color of an expert before setting up some kind of an interview.
Now, some say it's a lack of diversity within the newsroom. Others say it's just a general lack of sensitivity on the media's part. Dave Wildermuth explores these issues.
Hit in the head and killed.
A male suspect is in custody. Both wanted for murder.
So you could characterize it as abysmal, you could characterize it as ineffective, you could say they're not meeting their apparent mission.
The thing here they complain about is the lack of coverage. It's not enough.
I think the media needs to take a hard look in the mirror at itself.
Look in the mirror, say critics of color, and you will find a news product by, for, and about whites. Whether it's newscasts we watch or newspapers we read, its producers, they complain, are churning out a distorted diary of life, where people of color either sink baskets, commit crimes, or collect welfare. Are we who purport to be colorblind just plain blind?
It is sometimes not so much a blatant act of commission as it is a continuum of omissions.
Including people of color in coverage of everyday news events is written corporate policy here. Gannett, KARE-11's parent company, calls it mainstreaming. It's an ideal pursued by all the local TV newsrooms. To see if it's being practiced, we examined a week's worth of the late local news. All 4 stations, December 29th through the 4th of January. That's 27 newscasts, over 14 hours of news. Through the week, some of the better examples of mainstreaming. On Sunday, this man was interviewed by KSTP for his New Year's resolution. On Friday, WCCO interviewed an Asian doctor on breast cancer. He was the only expert of color anyone interviewed all week. That same night, Channel 9 KMSP ran a story on a black teenager getting her pilot's license at just 15 years old. Earlier in the week, KARE-11 interviewed a Hmong police officer, a positive role model. But the story happened to be about recent Asian gang violence.
And local Native Americans are now planning...
Native Americans showed up on all stations, but only when they were announcing plans to protest Indian mascot names or promoting sobriety during New Year's week. Hispanics mentioned only in crime and for hijacking a Cuban helicopter to political asylum in the U.S. Asians, outside of that doctor, crime only. It's stories about crime where people of color log the majority of their airtime, either as victims or suspects. 44 crime stories to be exact. And outside of sports, of the 28 people of color interviewed all week, more than a third of them were interviewed about crime.
And it goes back
Yusuf Mjeni with the Urban Coalition.
We don't just do murders on Monday and festivals on Sunday. We have rich, vibrant lives. I would like to see, the next time you do a story on the financial viability of Northwest Airlines receiving $885 million from the taxpayer of Minnesota, if you could identify a female, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, or African American financial consultant. There are people of color who are experts in geography, political science, in every major discipline, but they are never sought out to cover a mainstream story, and as a consequence...
Syl Jones, author and media critic, thinks he knows why.
Is it possible for a majority culture staff, almost entirely made up of white people, and particularly white people from Minnesota, is it possible to really cover the news with that kind of staff? The answer is no.
On the issue of hiring, even management concedes there is a problem.
Really? Well, I think overall it's a fairly abysmal record. I don't think that it's a white Wonder Bread look.
Newsrooms in the Twin Cities have been and are overwhelmingly white. This month, when Robin Robinson won an evening anchor chair at KMSP, she became only the second black in Twin Cities TV history to anchor a primetime newscast. The first, Tony Hughes Allen, did weather for Channel 11 briefly in the 70s.
Good evening. A combination of
behind the front line, diversity is also lacking. We surveyed the staffs of the Twin Cities newsrooms. At Channel 4, people of color make up less than 3% of the staff. None are in management. At Channel 5, it's just over 10%. None in management. At Channel 9, 11%. None in management. At 11, 10.5%. One in management. At the major dailies, it's no better. Less than 8% representation at the Star Tribune, 9% at the Pioneer Press. Ni Wing publishes the Asian American Press.
The major media somehow cover fairly, but not enough to cover the ethnic minority, especially in the Asian community. So much issues and concern has been ignored by the mass media.
The media, newspapers, radio, television, mediums. So named, someone once said, because they are neither rare nor well done. How's the media doing? If communities of color hold the mirror, the reflection does not flatter.
Pat Miles is out in the audience with a question from an audience member.
Bill Aiken in our audience raises an interesting point, I think, and one that perhaps the panel would want to address. But he says that coverage of minorities is not only negative, but that it has an impact on young people in this community in particular.
Yes, I feel very strongly that now there are problems in the communities all over, but when it shows the black community, it's more stress on the crime. An Afro-American like myself volunteer my time with organizations to try to uplift our youth, but when they see programs on television by the news media, it's sending out a different signal to the youth. And it's very disturbing to me when I see that. I mean, there is a lot of organizations I'm involved in that we really show our youth that there are people like myself who can make it in society, but when they watch the television news, it's a different thing, that we're just basketball players, or we rob, we steal, we do this, we do that. And I think it's more emphasized that way than trying to find out what we're doing in a positive way. And I agree with Sharon, you know, we need to start coming into the community and showing what volunteers like myself are doing for our community.
Peter, your paper, if I'm not mistaken, you have a policy concerning sex and people of color on the front page, don't you?
That's true. On our front page every day we try to have a male, a female, and a person of color every day.
Any negatives to that?
No, we haven't had any negatives. We've had to stretch very few times. I think once you change your perspective and think about everybody in our society, it's not hard to find people of color making news, but you have to make a mental leap.
And I have a confession to make to Janet Mason, and that is that the times when I'm sitting out there, sitting on the set, and I see a person of color, physician, whatever, engineer, I'm always pleasantly surprised, and I take notice of it, because we do that very little, even though we have a policy of mainstreaming. Well, why, how come we haven't been abiding by the policy, I guess?
I think we have, frankly, several problems. One, I think the staff in general, and not only at our station, but at all news organizations, needs to be more diverse. That's one thing. And then also, some people may call this racism, but I guess I call it more of a lack of understanding of other cultures, a lack of sensitivity. Our reporters having lack of sources in communities of color. And there are a couple ways you can address that. You could stand there and say, okay, you have to mainstream 3 stories today, but I don't really think that's the solution. I think the solution is that you've got to make people more sensitive, change their thinking, and to think of people of all colors, of being able to comment on the economy, or if you're doing a story on prices at the grocery store, that it doesn't matter if you're black or white or Asian or whatever, we are all impacted by those kinds of stories. And I think this town meeting and forums like this have really done some wonders within our own newsroom, in the sense that it's getting people to start to talk about it, to think about it. And we want to use this forum as a jumping off point to make sure that 6 months from now, a year from now, we have true mainstreaming on our air.
I want to ask Ruth Denny a question about something that happened in the paper today that I was reading. Ruth, you represent the interest of a lot of Indians or Native Americans in this part. There was a sports columnist today who was protesting the protest over nicknames that many of your people have organized, and concluded at the end the Native Americans would do better to address some other social problems. How does that strike you when you read that kind of account?
I'm very offended by that kind of philosophy, basically because it's been our culture that has been downgraded for 500 years now, and it's continuing, the process is continuing, and I think the media, the mainstream media, has a lot to do with emphasizing stereotypes of cultures, and especially our culture. The pieces you just saw, the powwow, that was a stereotypical piece as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of things going out in the Native American community that does not have anything to do with powwows or mascots. Mascots, for some reason, is now a real hot issue. We've been working on mascot issues for 10 years now, and ever since the Super Bowl was come here, it's become a real hot issue with mainstream press. And there's other very important issues out there as well that I would like to see the mainstream media hit on as well. And it seems like there's trendiness, there's so much trendiness to the mainstream media that it turns a lot of people off. And I don't think I would be in the business I'm in. I have an editor of a Native American newspaper. If our needs were being met by the mainstream press, our paper is mainly for Native American people. We have a lot of non-Native people reading the paper, and I think it's a good thing. Very rarely do we get reporters from Channel 11 or the Star Tribune or from the Pioneer Press that call us up and ask us our opinions or even ask us for some names of other people that they can ask questions of when there is a news conference going on. And that's another problem with the mainstream press, is that they keep asking the same people. When there's an issue that comes up, the mascot issues, they ask the same people over and over again. Clyde Belcourt is one person that they ask over and over again on each issue. Now there's a lot of Native American people that are working on these issues behind the scenes that are doing more than the people that the mainstream press go out and ask. So I think what the mainstream press really needs to do is they need to get some people of color on their editorial staff and people of color on their reporting staff, and in order for us to be in the stories in a very fair manner, we have to get people of color that represent the communities and also represent the readers and also the viewers of the TV stations in a very fair way, because there are people of color that are watching and reading out there, and there is not enough people on your staffs to be fair to us.
Can I ask Mr. McFarland a question? Let me ask you a tough question, Mr. McFarland, because I know that you can handle them. Everybody tells me that. Wherever I go in this country, when I read a newspaper like the newspapers that you represent, I find that they go well beyond the bounds of traditional journalism. They really are journals of advocacy, that they have a kind of political agenda that they're trying to advance, and they, even within their own community, they don't brook much discussion about divergent points of view. Is that a problem for you?
Well, I guess I feel the same way about your news program and about the white press. In that there's a
I thought I would just make my charge first.
Well, sure. Well, but the answer is in the question, and the question is homogeneity. In Minnesota, we call it Minnesota Nice or Minnesota Milquetoast. There is a myopic view of the world that white people hold, and there is an arrogance that is abhorrent and that is destructive of people of color and of white people. I have become very cynical of my colleagues in the press. I think that we really are failing, all of us, black and white alike, but especially my white colleagues, in carrying forth our mission to inform, educate, and to communicate possibilities for wide varieties of people. On the other hand, I'm not cynical about the public, about readers, and I think all of us have to listen that average Americans, white people and black people, Asians, all of us want more and expect more. The question is, how will people who want more be empowered to gain more? And I think I raised the question of consumerism as the key to empowering readers, the public, to direct what kind of coverage we get. The critical question for me is, as a black consumer, an African American, how long will I patronize a company that is the sponsor of a television show that destroys me and my family daily? So there's a golden triangle here that's been true of the relationship between black folks and white folks from the beginning, and it's still here today in advertising. Are my people expected to support advertisers that support coverage that shows my children and my neighbors as nothing but crack addicts, drug addicts, lost generations, people who are not capable of leading society or participating in society?
What program is that?
Which program in particular you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean? I'm saying that in television news I think is narrow, and print media. So the question is, if the newspapers continually portray only the drudgery and the horror and the misery, but not the full width and depth and breadth of black existence, but you narrow our community's portrayal to itself and to the rest of the world, you do a disservice to us and to the world.
Let's go to the audience. We have a question up there.
This question's for Council President Sales Belton. I've heard rumors that you may be running for mayor, and I'm wondering how you feel you'll be treated by the media. Do you think you'll get a fair shake when it comes to discussing your record on the council, as opposed to the publicity that you'll get for being a black woman running for mayor?
Thank you very much. Let me just say that I think that if I were, I actually do think that race will be an issue, and I think that the fact that I'm a woman will be an issue. I think the fact that I'm a mother of small children will be an issue, And I think that anything else that I might have done in my life that wasn't perfect will be an issue. And I think that worries me a lot. I worry about it for myself, but I also worry about it for other people who otherwise have, contributions to make to the community, have contributions to make as public servants, and their fear and anxiety about not coming forward for fear that something that they might have done would come to light and would hurt them and hurt their family. And I think that's a real problem. And I don't know what we can do about it. I obviously, by even running for the city council, have decided that, my commitment to, serve the community is greater than what maybe they could do to me back then. But I'll tell you, there's not a day that goes by that, something controversial doesn't happen in City Hall that I worry about an attack from the press that might come at me sideways.
Let's hold that right there, because when we come back, we're going to get to politics. And while we're in this commercial break, Sharon, you can take down the time to write down just that one thing that you did that wasn't perfect. And we'll discuss the issue of the media and politics when we come right back.
As I look out on this great Midwest, I feel a lot of pride.
Hard-working people need a hard-working truck. The 92 Chevy S10 Tahoe, V6 power, stereo cassette, sliding rear window, much more. And best of all, after a $1,000 rebate, only $94.52.
Driving you home in the heartland, Chevrolet and Geo.
See your Heartland Chevrolet Geo dealer this week and save.
What's the reaction to the latest sale at Dairy Queen?
Calling all cars.
For just 99 cents, you can get either a Blizzard treat, a home-style double burger, a single bacon cheeseburger, or a Breeze frozen yogurt treat. So hurry into your Dairy Queen store for the Nines Are Wild 99-cent sale. You'd be nuts not to.
We treat you right.
Come to the Pet Food Warehouse grand opening celebration at their newest location in Fridley. There'll be free balloons, hot dogs, pop, and face painting. Also see the Flying Colors Trained Bird Show with 20 trained birds and 1 chicken. Get your picture taken with Crunch, the Timberwolves mascot. Meet KS95's Grace Lorenzi. Save 10% on all premium pet foods, 20% off Tetra Fish Food, 30% off L&M Vita Vittles. No matter how you get there, don't miss the grand opening of the new Pet Food Warehouse in Fridley, 250 Osborne Road.
Quantum Leap will not be seen tonight in order to bring you the following program. Quantum Leap will be rebroadcast on Monday starting at 1:05 a.m.
Tom Brokaw, and I want to welcome you back to this KARE-11 town hall meeting on the role of the media. And I must say that before I came to the Twin Cities, to the state of Minnesota, I heard a lot about Governor Arne Carlson. I did not hear anything that would indicate we would be at this for 45 minutes before he said one word. The fact of the matter is I do expect that we'll hear from him in this next section, because now we want to talk about politics, the coverage of the people who are seeking office and their actions once they are elected. And of course, it's very much in our minds because we are once again in a presidential election year. We think that it's fitting to take a look at the role that the media play or effects on every level of government. Do we look at the issues, or do we look just at the behavior of the candidates? Do we help or hinder voters making their choices? Dennis Stauffer helps set the scene.
Critics call it covering the horse race when reporters focus on political spectacles like conventions instead of on the candidates' positions. When we talk about who's winning or losing instead of the issues. It's a practice which some say is forcing campaigns to act like sporting events.
Campaigns today, for better or worse, are part of today's entertainment business.
For Pat Forcia, the metaphors are based on hockey, not horses. But perhaps no one understands the relationships better. He's now Vice President of Communications for the Minnesota North Stars. And not so long ago, he was campaign chairman for Senator Paul Wellstone. Before that, he was state director for the Dukakis presidential campaign.
Well, for better or worse, television is just about everything in politics today, particularly at a statewide or a presidential level. If you're not on television, the fact of the matter is you're really not a real-life human being to most people.
Taken away by Smith. He sent it in a shot. Blocked, rebound, they score!
Forcia says it's not so different marketing a professional sports team or a media-savvy political candidate. One seeks fans, the other votes. Sports teams play when it's most convenient for fans and for television. Candidates set their campaign schedules for the convenience of the news cameras and spend up to 3/4 of their time raising the money needed to pay for TV spots.
The media really plays the role of gatekeeper.
Bill Morris is a longtime Republican political operative and former state party chairman who agrees that TV access is essential to candidates. But he says the media is not aggressive enough in setting the public agenda.
The media can surface issues, it can spotlight issues, and it can prod both elected officials and candidates to start taking action on issues.
Morris says the media frequently allows candidates to too easily dodge controversial topics, that we're too content to accept the images candidates create. Images like the dilapidated green bus, which the Wellstone campaign used to convey the message that his was not the well-funded political machine he said he was challenging. Forcia readily admits that the bus was devised with the media in mind. Morris also criticizes fellow Republican George Bush and other candidates for engaging in what some have called attack politics during the '88 presidential campaign.
We had Willie Horton, we had Boston Harbor, and a number of other issues which a couple of commentators have said made it the trivial pursuit of the presidency.
As critical as the media is to politicians trying to win public office, it can be just as critical after they get here.
The House will come to order.
The former Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Bob Vanasek, uses another sports metaphor when he says there are times when lawmakers act like fans at a football game, mugging the camera as it pans the crowd.
On those days when the cameras are present, you tend to see a lot more speeches coming from members. You tend to see sometimes a lot more pontificating, a lot more scrambling for individuals to get some airtime, and you tend to get less accomplished.
Vanasek says he and other lawmakers have learned out of necessity to condense their thoughts into TV sound bites, but he says that can be misleading.
And 20-second solutions to some of the problems our society faces do not exist. And the real unfortunate thing is that the public isn't getting that message, that about the complexities of the problems we're facing.
Go ahead. Cindy Brokaw.
Governor Carlson's communications director has worked on both sides of the cameras. As a former television anchor, she uses some of that expertise to try and influence the coverage he gets.
This is the spin I want you to put on the story. I mean, you don't have to do it that way, but I think this is the best way to do it, and I'll see if you buy it. You know, I mean, that's what it is. And you know, as a reporter, that you do put spins on stories.
Brokaw says she realizes that good government doesn't always make good TV, but she faults news directors for not being willing to give viewers, as she says, a bowl of oatmeal every once in a while in the form of government news.
That the Berlin Wall would crumble.
Well, Tom, you may not know it, but in the last governor's election here in the state of Minnesota, there was so much spin on so many balls that no one could hold on to any of them. It was a very unusual situation. We have a question out in the audience out here.
I'd like to address this question to Tom Brokaw and Paul Majors. Sometimes the media forces politicians to present their ideas in short, bite-sized pieces or slogans just so they can get coverage. What new ideas can the television media in particular do to cover elections more seriously and in depth? The debates that they show on television are seldom more than question and answer sessions, and a lot of times in the media and politicians just reach for the lowest common denominator in society. I think we should find a way to rise above for higher purposes.
Well, and as a matter of fact, you may be surprised to hear this, but we are attempting to do that. I think that there was a self-examination that went on for the last 4 years within both television and the newspaper political coverage of what happened in 1988. No one was very happy. The candidates' handlers those of us who are in television, those people who cover politics in print, I think that this time you'll see a good deal more different coverage. There'll be more of an examination, for example, of the television commercials. We'll have more debates. Now, about the business of debates, having just been through one of them, it's very hard to have a classic debate with 6 candidates. So the best way to do that is to do it with a Q&A format. And we worked that out this time with the Democratic National Committee and with all of the individual candidates, so they knew what they were getting in for. At NBC, during the course of 1992, we're not going to put our best reporters on the airplane so that they're hostage to the photo opportunities of the candidates that day. We're going to put them out and away from the airplane so they can cover a different and separate agenda. And let me just take that as a kind of cue to ask the governor, who has not had anything to say here yet tonight, as I say, quite surprisingly, and wonder whether or not what happened in this state the last time around, whether you think it will have any profound effect on the coverage of politics in the future.
I'm not really sure. One, because it's not my decision, it's more your decision, so I don't know what you're going to do.
But some of it is in the byplay that went on between all of the candidates as well.
No,
I mean, you were not exactly an innocent bystander, as I understand.
On the contrary, I was. No, seriously, on the contrary, I was an innocent bystander. That is not true. I was just a 10-day candidate after it was over. Go back to what Sharon said. That's really a very central issue. Candidates and those in public office do live in terror that whatever has happened over the course of their life could become a major news story. And just by your comments tonight, you automatically assume the candidates caused, in this case, the fall of a candidate. That's not true. The candidates had absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever. That really came out of the media. Now, I don't know that the media did the right thing or the wrong thing, but I do think, at least when the campaign is over, whomever did what to whom should be fully disclosed, truthfully, so that we don't have those characterizations.
If I'm not mistaken, Tim, did it come out of your paper?
Yeah.
Did you do the right thing or the wrong thing?
We did the right thing. What's important to readers and voters today is, can they trust their candidates? That's really what they want to know. And we have to go beyond the TV images, beyond the sound bites, and try to answer that question for readers. We do that by examining issues, but we do have to examine who the candidates really are and what they really stand for.
For the benefit
and
of everybody.
you have to ask, is it all bad that someone has to say, have I behaved as a public official should throughout my life? I'm not sure that's a bad question.
For the benefit of everybody here and at home who might not know, we're talking about John Grunseth, who had also been
Oh,
a
no,
candidate.
listen, trust me, in New York, we kept hearing these stories coming out of Minnesota and shaking our heads and saying, we're talking about Minnesota here, we kept saying?
That good old clean Minnesota, huh?
I might not have left the state. I was thinking, you know, if
well, we can always switch jobs if you want to come back. Let's go out to Pat in the audience. Pat?
See what I have to put up with every night, Tom? This is Greg Hedger, and he worries that the media can, in fact, influence who gets elected.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, how much do you consider the influence the media has over local and national policy and lawmaking and the resulting responsibilities that this entails?
Well, I think we have an enormous responsibility to try to tell you what's going on in your name at all times. We're not always very successful at it. If you look, for example, at the last 4 or 5 years and the big stories that were missed on the first pass, the savings and loan scandal, the scandal at the housing department, the BCCI scandal that we're going through right now, those were enormous stories that we didn't get because we didn't have enough people working on those kinds of stories. As for the influence that we have on the outcome of an election, I can't tell you how many times I have been through an election in which the front runner has finished last and can't figure out why, because he or she may have been reading how they were a shoo-in. What makes me very nervous about what's going on right now in terms of the kind of attention that Bill Clinton is getting in New Hampshire is that he is being automatically anointed the front runner, and I'm telling our people, let's be careful we don't crawl on the Clinton bandwagon. We don't have an election there yet because it has been the graveyard of Edmund Muskie and a lot of other front runners over the years. So the people, I think, as Mr. McFarland said, ultimately are the best arbiters of what's true and what's not, and what's in their best interest and what's not.
You know, one more thing, Tom, and I'd direct this at you. I used to live out west. In fact, when I lived in the state of Oregon. And I was getting ready to go to the polls to vote after work and heard, I think it was you, announce who'd been elected president. I went and voted anyway.
I didn't do that just because you were on your way to vote. I want you to know.
But you have changed your format. You do not announce now until the state has closed its polls. Is that correct?
But it wouldn't have made any difference if you had voted for the candidate of your choice at that point, because in presidential elections, they're decided by the electoral votes. And it's still possible in this country to compile enough electoral votes before you get to the Mississippi River, much less to all the way to Oregon. And when that feat has been accomplished, it's then news. And it's our obligation to say that the new president of the United States, based on the electoral vote that has been counted so far, is Ronald Reagan. And however important I believe you are, Paul, and your vote is, it wouldn't have made any difference in that election.
Tom, do you feel the national press has a particular role to play in how the public perceives Jesse Jackson or Doug Wilder? It seems to me that the public is being conditioned around this kind of candidacy more than around others, I think negatively.
Negatively around the two candidates? Oh, no, gee, I think
around the impossibility of a Jackson candidacy or the impossibility of a Wilder candidacy.
I think that there were separate cases, and I would not make them just the two black candidates. I think that Jesse Jackson was a true national force 4 years ago and 8 years ago, and I think that if he had chosen to run this time, he would have been again. I think that the consensus of judgment is, among his closest friends and advisors, is that Governor Wilder wasn't as prepared for this campaign as he might have been, and he had big troubles in the state of Virginia that ultimately caused him to say, I better give up my national hopes and get back and run for office there. But gosh, I thought that Reverend Jackson received an awful lot of attention. He was the only real story in Atlanta at the Democratic Convention, which was how was Governor Dukakis going to deal with Jesse Jackson. He got an awful lot of attention at that time. And I think that a lot of people believe, self-included, that the final chapter in Jesse Jackson's presidential hopes have not been written yet.
Tom, you've heard this before. We need to wrap here very quickly. We need to move on. Coming up, does the presence of the media at demonstrations, does that incite problems? We'll take a look at that when we come right back.
This was our first house. For 44 years, the Hollands have had their homeowners insurance with American Family.
And this is our daughter. She's a doctor now.
80% of American Family policyholders have been customers for more than 6 years.
She moved to Chicago.
But she took American Family with her. Loyalty, the mark of satisfied customers.
American Family Insurance.
Look in the white or yellow pages for the American Family agent nearest you.
Ice-Capades, presented by Legs Sheer Energy. That's excitement. That's spectacular. That's Yabba Dabba Doo, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, and the Flintstones, America's favorite cartoon characters from the world of Hanna-Barbera, live on ice.
It's hot.
Ice-Capades, presented by Legs Sheer Energy.
At Target Center for 9 spectacular performances, January 29th through February 2nd. Get tickets at Target Center, Ticketmaster, or call 989-5151.
Welcome back to everyone to our discussion surrounding the role of the media. Special interest groups, single issue groups, there are a lot of groups out there like that. And the question is, do they try to use the media to get their message across?
Groups lobbying for animal rights, for environmental reform, pro-choice, pro-life, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and Women Against Military Madness are just a few of the groups that stage events with a twofold purpose, really. One, of course, is to educate, and then to get attention, whether it's on television or in the newspapers.
Brad Woodard takes a look at the question, is the media covering an event, or are the events created solely for the media?
It's pretty scary, a lot of adrenaline.
I think you learn quite soon that you've got to be very entertaining.
What we're getting away from is information that makes people think. And we're getting into information that entertains and amuses people.
You don't need to kill your baby, please. You don't have to kill your child.
Advocacy groups do have
their personal agendas that are terribly important to them. And they tend only to see those personal agendas.
This is the bulletproof vest. Is this what I have to wear now to be queer?
We're the only minority that constantly has to prove our existence.
Ours is a country rich with diversity. The scenes, when combined, make up an elaborate patchwork quilt, pieced together daily by the media for display. For better or worse, it's through that display that most Americans assimilate their information and form their perceptions of the world that surrounds them. To a large extent, the media determine what issues they focus upon, and therein, critics say, lies the problem.
We're being told what we should think. The media is setting the agenda of what can be discussed. It's making all the assumptions on which we have to talk if we're going to talk.
Mary Shepard heads Women Against Military Madness, a grassroots organization that staged numerous anti-war demonstrations during Operation Desert Storm. Shepard says news outlets are failing to meet their obligations by, among other things, oversimplifying matters.
The anchor people and whoever writes the stuff that they read give you two different versions or two different solutions, as though those were the only ones possible. And they're almost alike, just shades of difference. While we have about 20 other solutions or versions that are either closer to the truth or more viable solutions, and we're never allowed to present them.
Opposition to war in the Gulf sparked confrontation on a number of Minnesota campuses today.
But the fact remains, news is a finite commodity, measured in minutes and columns. There simply isn't room for 20 solutions, and many special interest or advocacy groups feel that in the process of deciding what's news and what's not, those making the decisions are influenced by their own biases. Pro-life activist Brian Gibson.
You know, animals are shown that are torn apart regularly. Victims of murder are shown on TV, pictured in the news. They aren't too graphic in those situations, but the broken, torn bodies of unborn children are, for some reason.
Still others say the bias comes in the form of stereotypes. Tim Campbell is publisher and editor of the GLC Voice, a gay newspaper based in Minneapolis.
What I see is a tug-of-war, where the reporter is trying to get the activist to mouth some pablum that would be compatible with the reporter's preconception. And
Campbell points to the murders of John Chenoweth and Joel Larson as an example. Both gay men murdered within days of one another last summer. Chenoweth and another man were shot while allegedly having sex in Riverside Park, a known gay hotspot. Larson, on the other hand, was killed while walking, presumably by himself, through Loring Park, also known as a gay hangout. At the time, there was much speculation the two murders were related.
There was no sexual element in the Joel Larson murder. The media insists on imagining, because it was in the gay park, that there was a sexual element. There was no sexual element.
But for all their criticism, activists find themselves between a rock and a hard place. If they want their voices heard, and they do, that means vying for news coverage. With so much news and so little time, sometimes it takes a lot to get noticed.
I think the focus goes on the theatrics and not on the message. And part of that demonstration is that theatrical part. But that's not the reason that we're there. We're there because we have something to say, and every time that it gets lost...
And some say it's not all that's lost.
When people really feel the need, they're hungry for real information, and they have been manipulated by and used for so long that they have no faith in it anymore.
We want to go now to Joan is up in the balcony with a question.
I'm here with Mary Shepard again, her second appearance. She wants to know about access to the media, how to gain access to the media. Looks to me like you're doing okay, Mary.
Well, I must say I'm surprised that I got so much, and maybe I don't deserve more, but I do want to know, if you have an issue that you think is really, really important to everybody in Minnesota, how do you get past these gatekeepers, these editors? And I'd like to give a particular issue that's happened right now, and that's the storage of nuclear waste in the floodplain of the Mississippi. There's a Sioux tribe that is trying to get that information to the people. It was not in any of the electronic media, so they finally tried to buy time. They were refused, and I would like to know what you would suggest that they should do, having tried every avenue they can for an issue that I think is just crucial.
Mary, I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to talk to Paul about it right after this program.
Well,
Okay?
I'll tell you what. Tom mentioned it to me earlier, and Mary, what we're going to do, if you stay tuned to KARE-11 at the end of the month, at the end of January here, we're going to do a half-hour or hour program on that. We haven't exactly decided on the time length of the program. It may, in fact, be an hour. But we're going to address that very issue. We are bringing in people on all sides of the issue, and we will do a background piece on the issue as well to begin the program, and then we will let everybody have their say. Somewhat like we did with the issue involving Northwest Airlines.
Can I say something about that general issue, about how do you get access? You're never going to get past the gatekeepers. What you want to do is try to develop a relationship with the gatekeepers. And the fact of the matter is, I was describing this to a friend of mine the other day, it's a little bit like retailing. You really have to find out who's in charge, write to them, make a persuasive case. They may not always buy your argument, because news, like everything else, beauty included, it's often in the eye of the beholder, and that includes bias. So we may not always agree with your point of view, but at least we should listen. We're going to go back down here to the floor as well, I think, to Lisa.
Yeah, I have a question for both Paul and Tom. We would all like to see topics that we were talking about before. Mr. McFarland was talking about, the last lady was commenting on topics of a little more weight. While we say that, I think most people watch the quote-unquote mainstream news instead of McNeil-Lehrer. And I think most of us in the room would be caught watching Inside Edition or something like that, because these are the topics that sell. With that in mind, as more specialized TV programs like Inside Edition and hard copy, things of this nature come about, how is that going to change what you cover on both a local scale and a national scale? Keeping in mind that we vote with our viewing time, which turns into dollars for you all, and whoever's watching you. The more ratings you have, the more money you can pull in for the commercials for the station.
Well, I'm aware of McNeil-Lehrer, but what's Inside Edition? No, I do know what that is, but I honestly, I cannot recall a day since Inside Edition has been on the air, or hard copy, or any of those programs where anybody in the newsroom has said, have you seen what was on hard copy last night? And, geez, we need to do a follow-up on this. It has not had an impact on us. That's entertainment programming as far as our newsroom is concerned, and that's where it will stay.
I think that the news, in many ways, is not ahead of the change in the times. We're always slightly behind, and as we're slightly behind going into the 1990s, I think that you'll find newspapers and television alike will be dealing with much more serious issues, because the country is in a serious mood now. They're desperate for answers. We are a part of that. We're desperate for answers about our own business even, so I think you will see more serious coverage. Pat?
This is Julie Costa.
Mr. Brokaw, journalist David Shaw has written a lengthy article in which he asserts that the media has taken a pro-abortion position, and I would certainly agree. How fairly do you feel that the right to life issue is being covered?
Well, I talked to David at some length about that, and a lot of it, in our differences of opinion, were that he was referring mostly to the kinds of language that we use in it. I think that we have covered the issue fairly. It's an argument that I suspect that you and I can't resolve between ourselves here tonight. I do think that David Shaw's article made me think more carefully about how we describe the various groups. For example, I know that a lot of groups who describe themselves as pro-life do not like it when we say anti-abortion, but we do pick up pro-choice, for example. So we've thought through more carefully about how we describe those groups who say that they are pro-choice. It is an emotional issue in this country, but yet overwhelmingly the national polls will show you that the people who are most sympathetic to those who now describe themselves as pro-choice, and as a political issue across the country on a national basis, it has not cut as deeply as a lot of folks would like it to. So it's a struggle for us constantly, and it will be again in 1992. I feel that we've worked very hard to give it fair coverage, and I slightly disagree with my friend David Shaw about his analysis.
We have a question on. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to mention also that when the mainstream press is doing a story on Native American groups or activists that are protesting something, they seem to latch an adjective to them. Last in the 60s and 70s, when AIM was doing some protests, they called them militants, and that name stuck with them for 20 years. Now it's dissidents, so I'm wondering where these adjectives are coming from and why they feel they have the right to call Native American protesters dissidents and militants.
I think that's just probably a lack of good work on the part of the people who were doing it. We have another question out here on this side of the audience.
I have a question. What do you think about your visit to Moscow and how our media covers what is really happening there? And maybe rather than use nice short word shortages, started to use real word disaster and starvation that really happening there.
It's the most exhilarating thing that I've witnessed as a reporter when I go to Russia. I've been going there now for 20 years, and what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years has been terribly exciting from a personal point of view for me, especially for those people who are freed at last to tell the truth about what's going on in their society, to share it not just with us but with their neighbors as well. I think they're among the most courageous reporters that I know right now, and they have the most daunting job that I know in this world to describe what is going on in the chaos of the Commonwealth, and especially with the economic reforms where everyone's emotions and even their physical well-being are at stake here. So I think they're doing a terrific job.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Tom doesn't have a choice. We're going to tie him to a chair right out here. You can have at him. We'll be right back.
RTV, Rainbow In-Store TV. Watch it. Watch it. Featuring the Twin Cities' greatest hits, low prices, and good stuff. RTV. Watch and win a trip to the Ice Palace Super Bowl party and your chance to be limoed away to Super Bowl 26. RTV. Rainbow In-Store TV. RTV. Watch it and win.
Come to the Pet Food Warehouse grand opening celebration this Friday and Saturday at their newest location, 250 Osborne Road in Fridley. Come join in the fun at the Pet Food Warehouse, now in Fridley.
I was one of those who didn't want to know, and it cost me my breast and almost my life. So now I watch Diana Pierce on KARE 11. Every day on healthcare, she has the latest medical breakthroughs from experts who know, and that makes me feel good, because good healthcare really matters.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Brokaw here at Pearl Harbor. Good evening from Saudi Arabia as we continue the special edition of NBC Nightly News. Good evening from Moscow. Good evening from Capitol Hill. Good night from London. I'm Tom Brokaw. As we say goodnight from Brandenburg Gate, who knows what tomorrow will bring? Who knows indeed, for those of you who think I'm out here to do my Frank Sinatra imitation to sing it. Wrong. This, in fact, is the television news version of those old Viking funerals. What Paul Majors has done is put me in a boat, set it afire, and shipped me out to sea right here. I said in an interview with Brian Lammer today in the St. Paul paper that I feel very strongly that too much of television news, especially at the national level, is that we talk and you listen. I think a lot of my friends even who are still here in the upper Midwest wonder what may have happened to me once I moved to Washington, New York, Los Angeles, or the other places that I have worked over the years. Have I lost touch with the values of this part of the world, with the concerns here? This is a small effort on my part to tell you tonight that I have not, and that I want to hear what you have to say about what we do and how we do it, because these are very instructive experiences for us. We're going to go upstairs to a question.
Yes, I have a question that's related to the controversy that's been going on recently around the film JFK. And I'm not going to ask you about the film, but I did want to ask you how you felt the media of today would have dealt with the assassination of President Kennedy differently if it had happened today, or similarly.
No, I think that there would have been I think that the investigation process that took place around JFK stretched out too long. I think it would be compacted a lot more now. There would be a lot more intense coverage of the assassination and the motivations. My own reading of it is that we probably would not have arrived at a different conclusion. We had this discussion just yesterday. How do we deal with the film JFK, which I hasten to add I have not yet seen, but based on all the descriptions that I have read of it from people that I trust, I think that it's intellectually terribly dishonest. I am going to go see it for myself. I finally have concluded that I need to do that. But we are working on a story tomorrow on Nightly News about why not release the papers. Let the Warren Commission documents be set free so that the American people can see for themselves. I think that's the only way we can deal with it. And I don't know what the conclusion of the American people will be. There may be some kind of, if you will, permit me the metaphor, other smoking gun in there. I suspect not at this point, but I do think that we ought to be able to judge for ourselves. Pat?
You have a long line here of people with questions, Tom. You're going to be busy
Or
tonight.
people to whom I owe money. You don't know at this
We
point.
never know.
Right.
Cecilia Wild from Maplewood, Minnesota, and what I'm asking Mr. Brokaw concerns a local issue, but it reflects a national problem as well. A boy in South Dakota has his arms torn off in an accident, receives extensive coverage on both TV and in the papers for 2 days. A baby has an arm torn off prior to birth, is born alive, and lives. This story is carried in the New York Times, Washington Times, and USA Today. There is no coverage in the Twin Cities and many of the other high national papers. My question is, why does the media refuse to print or air any story that puts abortion in a bad light? This was the result, I'm sorry, I neglected to say, of a botched abortion where the baby survived.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is that there have been some very difficult stories that have been done on abortion. It is one, as I say, that I don't think that we can resolve here tonight. I know that the emotions run very strongly in the state about that issue. Over the years that we have covered abortion, we have covered it from A to Z, so far as I'm concerned, that we have been as fair as we can be with it. I can tell you that there are other issues as well that are very emotional out there that will never get resolved here tonight. Mr. McFarland has one. Ms. Denny has one. We just do the best that we can, and if we don't always strike you as fair, that makes me feel bad. We'll try a little harder the next time. But I think that a careful review of this issue or most others will find that they are covered very thoroughly. Good, bad, and indifferent. Joan?
Tom, I have Melanie Brown up here. She told me to tell everybody she's from Concordia College in St. Paul.
I was just wondering, we had talked about all the bad things you hear in the news, and I was just wondering how you handle situations or stories that you find frustrating or make you angry.
Well, I swallow hard and try to go forth with them. On the air, sometimes I find myself unexpectedly moved by events that I don't think will touch my emotions, but do. I may have even seen a videotape several times. I can tell you that I am a sucker for touching sports stories, for example, or stories of small people involved in large triumphs. And I will tell you, too, all of you, that every night we do try to tell the good news. I mean, that's why the closing story is there, for example. There are stories of triumphs of all kinds. One of the first stories that I got involved in medicine involves a man who's a friend of mine who's here tonight, and that's John Najarian from the University of Minnesota. We've known each other for about 25 years now, because I went to a meeting of the Board of Regents in California where they were trying to cut back the funds for the University of California Medical School. And the chancellor at the medical school was very clever. He brought over John Najarian and about 5 renal transplant patients who were alive and who may not have been because of budget cutbacks. And John told it in the most compelling fashion. We began a friendship that has also been productive for me professionally because I've been able to keep up with good news about medicine through John, transplants in various areas, and progress that has been made. That's just one of 1,000 examples of the good news that we have tried to reflect over the years. Lisa?
Mr. Brokaw, Mr. Majors, certain members of the panel, how do you compare the general media accuracy of reporting the news without bias versus those news publications whose creed it is to report the other side of the news as it really is? Or does the media work on John Keene's principle, words ought to be a little wild, for they are the assault of thoughts on the unthinking?
Well, you know, news is really the first rough draft of history. Emphasis on rough. We're trying to deal with facts. The truth can be very elusive. You know, you can go into any court case, and you've got a lot of witnesses, and you'd be enormously surprised, I think, by the variety of descriptions that you would get just for a fender bender about who was at fault and how it happened. We have to come to grips with that every day on a much larger scale. I can tell you that I've got a lot of friends in the newspaper business across this country. They've got a rich variety of personal beliefs. But when it comes to what they're doing, and this is true in television news as well, they have really only one objective, which is to try to tell you what happened that day in the fairest, most accurate way possible. Because if they don't, what they're putting at risk is their own livelihood. You know, we come to you with a reputation for integrity, not much more. John has surgical skills. I have other friends out here who have other business skills tonight. I've got a reputation for telling you how things are going in your society and in the wider world, and you can either rely on it or not. And if you can't rely on it, you'll quickly find that out, and you'll turn away from me. So I think that the whole business of news editors in television or in newspapers getting together and somehow trying to impose their bias on a story just doesn't have much foundation to it. I really don't. Karen?
Hello, Mr. Brokaw. I never doubt your integrity or your concern for what you do, but there's a great rift in the media. How do you rectify major commercial interests being one of the major polluters and destroyers of habitats on this planet, and being able to justify biting the hand that feeds you, basically? How are you going to turn the tables around? Because major commercial interests, no one's going to turn around in the news and say so-and-so is bringing the show is also dumping on our planet and dumping on our future. How are we going to rectify General Electric leaving a wasteland of nuclear waste for thousands of years ahead of us? Will you ever do a major report on General Electric's destruction of the health of this planet through its nuclear enterprise?
The fact of the matter is that we've done a number of stories about nuclear waste that have involved GE as well, and what we have done within the news division is we have given GE more coverage than it deserves on negative stories because we are so sensitive to that. We've also added language to any description of any story that involves GE in which we say General Electric or GE, comma, parent company of NBC, comma, and then go on. But I can tell you in the last several years, since GE has owned the news division, we have come across stories that if we had not been owned by that company, we never would have put on the air because they were not of general interest. I'm not talking about the nuclear waste question now. And we have gone ahead and put them on the air because we do not want anyone to think that we are in some way attempting to keep negative news about General Electric from the public. And we have continued to address nuclear waste. GE is not the only company that's involved in it. And by the way, there are lots of people, more these days, I don't happen to be one of them, that believe that nuclear power will be revived as we move toward the 90s and not be dismissed as it was in the 80s. So it's a complicated issue, and we will continue to cover it, and the role of GE will have no impact on the decisions that we make. I can offer you my personal assurance. We'll be back right after this.
Driving home in the heartland, 1992 Geo Metro is the best you can get. At 58 miles per gallon highway, Geo Metro's the highest gas mileage car in America. And with a price tag of only $65.34, Geo Metro's the pump, pass, and penny pension winner.
Driving you home in the heartland, Chevrolet and Geo.
See your Heartland Chevrolet Geo dealer this week and save.
RTV, Rainbow In-Store TV. Watch it. Watch it. Featuring the Twin Cities' greatest hits, low prices, and good stuff. RTV. Watch and win a trip to the Ice Palace Super Bowl party and your chance to be limoed away to Super Bowl 26. RTV, Rainbow In-Store TV. RTV. Watch it and win.
We use a loan to fix up old classics, like this 58 Pontiac.
Tom and Marcia Reno have a line of credit through American Family Financial Services.
There were no closing costs, no extra costs at all.
And you don't need to be insured with American Family to get a loan.
Couldn't believe how fast and easy it was.
We like things streamlined.
American Family Insurance.
Look in the white or yellow pages for the American Family agent nearest you.
Is this all you're planning to bring back from your next vacation? This year, take home a Club Med vacation. There are Club Med villages for families, couples, and singles.
Welcome back, everybody. We don't have much time left, but we would like to accomplish just a little bit before we go. Tom?
Mindy, Karen, we all know that our business and your business, newspapers, tough economic times, a lot of pressure these days to be more economically successful. Does that put more pressure on you to be more sensational on the front page of your paper?
It puts more pressure on us to be smarter about what we do every day, because there's not anybody with a giant pocketbook in the sky telling us there's lots of money to be had, and we can hire 40 more reporters to cover the issues, many of which got raised here tonight. But I think we've had an exciting opportunity to hear a refreshing change of perspective, I think, is going on in this country, where people are far more interested in a serious exploration of the issues, and that provides us with a unique opportunity to maybe change our resources and not cover some things and let us cover some serious issues that are out there, like child care and transportation and the rebuilding of this country and the economic issues, and that's wonderful.
Governor Carlson, do you think that the people of Minnesota, and across this country for that matter, are ready to make the tough decisions and to read enough to know to make the informed decisions about their lives?
I think the answer is a definite yes. I would like to see more politics drift more towards substance and less towards sizzle. I think it's essential for the 90s.
Janet, let me ask you something. What can I expect and what can our viewers expect as we leave here tonight? What are you going to take out of here and perhaps implement at Channel 11?
Well, I think the first thing that I'm going to do is take many of the comments that you shared with us and have those kinds of discussions with our own staff. I think many of the things that you said tonight are very enlightening. Probably the first time that many of my staff members have heard comments like this, and I think that's very healthy, and I think we can evolve and grow from here.
Tim McGuire, if we come back in 10 years, will we be having the same discussion?
No, we'll have a lot of different discussions, because the 90s are going to be one of the great change decades, and people are going to be more involved. The people are going to dictate the 90s and dictate our future, and the discussion will be a lot different in 10 years.
Tom Connery, journalism better today or worse than it was 20 years ago?
It's better. We get, it's easier to digest this stuff, we have more accurate information, and there's more of it, and it comes in a lot better form.
Is there too much of it?
I don't think there's too much of it. The problem is trying to get people to seek it out.
Thank you all, panel. We'd like to thank you very much for coming here and being with us this evening. We'd also like to thank all of you for braving the cold temperatures out there and being a part of us here at the World Theater. And Tom, certainly a very big thanks to you for coming to Minnesota, broadcasting the nightly news from here, and joining us for this evening.
This is genuine. It's not something that I'm paid to say. My thanks to KARE-11 and to all of you especially. We're only as good as you want us to be, and we're better when you ask more of us. And that's an important thing for you to keep in mind as you reflect on this evening. Thanks very much for joining us.
Maybe in 10 years you'll come back. Thank you. Thank you.
KARE-11 News, Town Hall Meeting, the role of the media, has been brought to you by American Family Insurance. All your family protection under one roof. Visual Motivation and Rainbow In-Store TV, your in-store television source. And your Heartland Chevy Geo dealers. Tonight's winning Lotto Minnesota numbers. We'll repeat these numbers in a few minutes during KARE-11's News at 10. From your 24-hour news station, this is Paul Majors, Diana Pierce, Jeff Passolt, and meteorologist Paul Douglas. And this is KARE-11 News at 10.
Good evening. Police now believe someone murdered civil rights activist Earl Craig Jr. in his Minneapolis apartment. The investigation to find out who did it and why headlines the news tonight. In a moment, we'll also tell you about allegations of sexual assault against teenage girls at a Western Wisconsin treatment center. Also, a jury returns its verdict in the lawsuit filed by former anchor Ruth Spencer against KSTP television. And we'll find out why Tom Brokaw's visit to the Twin Cities has provided Minnesota with something money can't buy. But we begin with the latest on the murder of civil rights activist Earl Craig Jr. His body was found yesterday in his Minneapolis apartment. KARE 11's Dave Wildermuth is in our newsroom with tonight's developments. Dave?
Yesterday the medical examiner said preliminary indications were that Craig died of natural causes, but tonight after the autopsy was concluded we learned that he was stabbed in the neck. Now the questions are who did it and why.
I mean, at this point we need to pinpoint where he was and who he was with before we can determine whether it was somebody he knew.
Police have retraced Craig's comings and goings up to midnight Saturday night. They now say they believe he was killed sometime Sunday. When his body was discovered Tuesday in his apartment, it was bloated, which may explain why police failed to see the stab wound. At Craig's apartment today, investigators found no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, which may suggest he knew his killer. At 52, the director of the Minneapolis Neighborhood Revitalization Program was a model public servant. But Craig's private life, say friends, was long a matter of debate and concern among colleagues and admirers. Craig was openly gay and said to be sexually promiscuous. Police say it is one of many avenues being explored.
At this point, we're not limiting the investigation to a particular lifestyle. We're more interested in finding his movements and his whereabouts after we can pin it down to midnight, Saturday night.
A friend, Spike Moss, says leads should be pursued, but warns that Craig's personal life should not be sensationalized.
This man has done enough for human beings, as a human being, to be deserving of a thorough investigation, not in terms of mudslinging, but in terms of justice and finding out who killed Earl Craig.
Authorities are hoping that Craig's Jeep, which is missing, may provide some answers. It is a 1991 Jeep Cherokee, 4 doors, black in color. It has a Minnesota license plate number 186DWX. And anyone with any information should call police at 673-3405. Police are hoping to get some calls because they definitely need some tips in this case.
Dave, does now the delay in determining how he died slow its investigation down?
Well, police say no because they said that they were initially treating this as a possible homicide anyway. So they had investigators working the case. We asked that question at the news conference today. They say no, that they have not lost any time in this case.
All right, thank you. Charges of sexual assault and allegations of a possible cover-up are surfacing tonight in Prescott, Wisconsin. Authorities arrested a man who they say attacked at least 4 patients at a center which treats teenagers for psychological and chemical dependency problems. KARE 11's Dennis Stauffer reports.
River Hills is a treatment center designed to help troubled teenagers, but it may have added to the troubles of some patients who were victims of sexual assault by another patient.
Investigators believe at least 4 female patients, ages 13 to 15, were sexually abused here by a male patient over a period of about a year.
The suspect is one Michael Taylor, who was from near Chicago when he was being treated here. He was just arrested late today in Arizona. And there's another problem.
There are allegations that staff was aware of incidents and did not report them.
Just yesterday, Pierce County Sheriff's deputies seized patient records from River Hills to find out who knew what and when.
They're still going through the records, but the investigators told me that there are some items in there that'll help that case.
Riverside Administrator Ron Rowe today said he didn't know his employees' actions were being questioned.
This is the first that I've heard that employees knew about something and didn't report it, and that's something that we cannot and will not tolerate.
The charges against Taylor were filed today. Charges are still pending against 1 or more Riverside employees who may have violated Wisconsin's mandatory reporting law. Dennis Stauffer, KARE 11 News, Prescott, Wisconsin.
River Hills is owned by a California-based company called Medical Enterprises. It's been named in national stories about allegedly improper practices at some of the company's 90 other facilities. An off-duty security guard is dead after he was shot with his own gun early this morning in Mankato. Police say another man grabbed 22-year-old Paul Weidell's gun and it went off while the 2 men wrestled over it. Police say the shooting was not the result of a fight. No charges have been filed. An entire year of planning is about to pay off for the Minneapolis Police Department. 400 officers will be on duty Super Bowl Sunday for everything from crowd control to traffic duty. Police say they don't expect things to be as difficult as the World Series, but they've tried to plan for every situation.
We've anticipated a lot of different bad things happening, which I really don't care to go into.
But that's our job. We're supposed to anticipate bad things happening.
Police will be setting up a perimeter on Super Bowl Sunday, meaning drivers won't be allowed near the dome. If, as rumored, President Bush drops in for a Super Bowl visit, security would be even tighter. We have some updates tonight on a couple of stories we've been following this week. 18-year-old John Thompson was taken off the respirator today at North Memorial Medical Center. He's the North Dakota teen who underwent a rare surgery over the weekend to reattach both of his arms. They were cut off in a farm accident. He was well enough today to ask his nurse for some orange juice. More surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. And a jury today found KSTP television guilty of intentionally making false representations to former anchor Ruth Spencer. The jury awarded Spencer $82,000 in back pay. Spencer had asked for twice that amount. Jurors agreed with Spencer that Channel 5 misrepresented its intentions to diminish her role in the newscast. Spencer was fired after secretly taping a conversation with her boss. The trial is now in its second phase to determine whether Channel 5 should pay punitive damages to Spencer. President Bush isn't officially a candidate for re-election yet, but he sure looked like one today. The president made several stops in New Hampshire, including a surprise visit to a dairy farm near Portsmouth. Mr. Bush didn't reveal any specific strategies for the economy, but he promised to address that issue during his State of the Union speech later this month. President Bush's Russian counterpart is also battling economic problems. Angry taxi drivers threatened to block Boris Yeltsin's motorcade route today in St. Petersburg. Yeltsin is urging the starving Russian people to be patient and give his reforms a chance to work. And the European community today recognized the war-torn Yugoslavia republics of Croatia and Slovenia as independent countries. The latest ceasefire in Yugoslavia's civil war has held for 2 weeks. Yugoslavia is protesting the EC's decision, claiming it violates Yugoslavian sovereignty. At this time last year, Americans were on the edge, fearing the Gulf War was about to begin. This is the eve of the war's first anniversary. Tonight, veterans gathered in Minneapolis for a service of remembrance and Thanksgiving. After the lighting of candles, they read the names of the 7 Minnesotans killed in the Gulf War. They also paused to pay tribute to veterans of other American conflicts. The bombing began in the Gulf on January 16th. Tomorrow night, we'll look back at the conflict and see how it's changed our lives since then. Well, if you watched KARE 11 tonight, you know NBC's Tom Brokaw is in the Twin Cities. His visit provided Minnesota with something money can't buy.
Good evening from the World Theater here in St. Paul. I'm in the Twin Cities as a part.
Brokaw anchored his nightly news broadcast from St. Paul's World Theater before co-hosting tonight's town hall meeting with Paul Majors. In addition to its world coverage, NBC ran 3 stories about Minnesota, telling the rest of the country about things most of us already knew. Robert Bazell put together a story about the various proposals to create an affordable universal health care system in Minnesota.
Whatever emerges, it appears that Minnesota will lead the way for health care reform for other states and the federal government. Robert Bazell, NBC News, St. Paul.
And business reporter Mike Jensen looked at why Minnesota's economy is healthier than in many other states.
Why is this part of the Midwest doing relatively well, besides government involvement? For one thing, it's diversified. Farms and factories and stores. Also, in recent years, its economy has grown slowly and steadily. No boom, but also no bust. Mike Jensen, NBC News, Minneapolis.
And Roger O'Neill reported about why the Twin Cities have become a national hub for advertising agencies.
Minnesota ad companies have weathered what most agree is a depression in the ad business pretty well. And it is because of the creative talent assembled here, despite a state which some joke about having only 2 seasons, winter and July.
In all, NBC used almost 9 minutes to cover those 3 stories. They accounted for nearly 1/3 of NBC's nightly news coverage. Well, the NBC crew is probably glad to get away from the frigid weather. Paul Douglas will tell us when to expect relief from our sub-zero temperatures. Later, a sneak preview of a new NFL music video just for the Minneapolis Super Bowl. In sports, the Gophers